Hi, and welcome to part 2 of our How to PhD mini-series on our podcast, Dysphagia Matters. This time, our guest is Dr. Nadine Connor. She is a professor in the Department of Communication Sciences and Disorders at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and her research interests include voice and swallowing disorders, head and neck cancer, aging, and neuromuscular function in the head and neck.
In this episode, we would like to highlight one aspect of the PhD process, how we can find and decide on a good mentor. At the Dysphagia Research Society Congress 2022, Nadine gave a talk about finding a mentor. This inspired us to invite her to the podcast to talk about her perspective as a mentor about mentors. So let's get started.
Thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me.
Just as a quick background information, this episode is especially for students who are looking for a future mentor, either for the bachelor or master thesis, but especially for their PhD. We wanted to make an episode about this as we think starting a PhD is at least as big of a challenge as doing a PhD. There are many different things to consider, to decide, and to plan when beginning a PhD. That's why we would like to highlight one aspect of this process. How can we find and decide on a good mentor? Therefore, Nadine, would you mind starting by explaining what you or the literature understand by mentoring?
Yes, sure, I'm happy to. So mentoring is a complex relationship between two people, one person being the elder, experienced guide, and the other being perhaps a newcomer. Generally, when we're talking about a PhD program, the mentee, or the person being mentored, is a young person, perhaps inexperienced in the ways of the field, without much research experience, because for a PhD, we're really talking about research and developing those research skills and those research foundations. So mentoring has been defined in different ways by different people. It involves providing multiple types of support to the mentee, including advising, promoting and sponsoring the visibility of that mentee, coaching them, teaching them in terms of techniques, writing, all of the skills that you need to have to be successful after you're finished with your PhD and you move to a more independent state and perhaps become a mentor yourself.
So this sounds like it's also a lot of work and responsibility for the mentor. How can I find a good mentor that does all these great things for me?
Right. And I think the things that I talked about too, I didn't mean to leave out providing a role model, providing that psychological, psychosocial support to the mentee. That's all really, really important. So in terms of finding a mentor, you should decide how much of those different things you need. And what is that mentor's track record in providing all of those things? And, that varies from person to person for sure. Some people are better at the sponsoring aspect of mentoring. Some people are better at the psychosocial aspect. Some people are better at the teaching of techniques. Some mentors are more hands-on, so maybe that's more akin to your style. Some are more hands-off. I consider myself to be pretty hands-off with my mentees. What is it that you want to learn? I actually want to know that. I don't just tell people, you're going to do this or you're going to do that. I want to know what your passion is and what it is that you want to devote your career to. So in terms of finding a mentor and deciding on a mentor, those are all really important things that you need to think through. And when I worked on that talk that I gave at the DRS meeting, I did a lot of thinking about my own process. What is it that I do to move someone from dependence to independence, which is the goal of mentoring? And doing that self-assessment is really an important thing. Are there people out there in the field who share your interests and can respond to your needs as a mentee? Are there people who will be able to fund you as you do your studies? That's a really important part of it. And then there's the part that I've already alluded to about that mentor's style, that mentor's history of producing practitioners in the field, and that mentor's commitment to teaching.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And you just mentioned that there are some mentors who are more hands-on, and you would describe yourself more as hands-off. Would you mind explaining what this looks like, or what we can understand by that?
Yeah, so I meet with my mentees and I see what they're up to, how they've progressed on their studies. By studies, I mean research projects.
Yeah.
And other than that, I don't really push them and give them deadlines for having to have things done, because I would like these things to be more self-generated at this stage. We're not working on a semester schedule anymore. However, I do have obligations to get the research done that I'm funded to do. So I need to touch base with people and make sure they're on track, see if I can remove obstacles they might be experiencing, see if I can offer different facilitators to them to get their work done. But I don't tell them what classes to take. I advise, what I think you should take to meet your requirements of the program and also your future development of what it is you want to learn. I don't tell people what they have to learn.
Yeah, it's not the right stage anymore. It's a PhD, like you said. And so if we are looking at the mentor's CV, for example, usually we can't find out if their mentoring is more hands-on or hands-off, for example. Do you have any recommendation how we can assess that?
Yes, I do. I think it's very important to talk to the people who have been mentored by that person.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, is she around? Is this mentor around, or is she spending most of the academic year in a foreign country giving talks?
Yeah.
How much support can this person give? Did you find it to be a worthwhile experience working with this person?
Yeah, that's a helpful tip, I think, to talk to former or current mentees from that mentor. Yeah.
I would talk to both. I mean, the former ones might not feel as constrained in what they say as the current.
Yeah, that's true. And then you also talked about the needs that we as mentees might have. How can we then assess those?
Do you mean like the financial aspect?
Of course, that's an important topic as well.
For that, I would look at the mentor's track record in obtaining research grants and look at their current grant and see how long it lasts. So if that mentor has 3 years left on their grant, then you can probably be assured 3 years of funding. Hopefully they would get a new grant to replace that one before it ran out of time and money. But that's definitely something to look at. But I think your question maybe was broader in terms of assessing your needs. And think about what it is that you want to learn, and think about that in a really broad way. Because sometimes our idea of what we want to learn is very much constrained by what we already know. Like, for instance, we do basic science research in my lab. And if you've been primarily involved in clinical training and clinical practice, you might not even know that this other side of the world exists. So you should be open to that. But think about what it is that you need in your laboratory that you're going to spend the next 5 years in. What techniques are used in that laboratory? Because chances are you will learn those techniques, and those techniques will become a part of what you do in your own dissertation research. Assess your level of preparation for working in those areas. And that doesn't have to be a deal breaker. So, as I mentioned, we do mostly basic science work, but we often take students who don't have a background in that, and we provide them with that necessary training, direct them to coursework that will facilitate that, and that's how they begin. We don't automatically say, well, you're not already a molecular biologist, so we don't want you in the lab. We would not generally say that. We would look for other traits where we think you could be successful in these new areas.
So what exactly are you looking for then when you consider taking on a new mentee?
Yeah, so I definitely look at their past accomplishments, what they've done in the area of research, even if it isn't in our area. I look at their letters of recommendation and try to read between the lines there as to how highly this person is being recommended. I meet them. That's been harder with COVID, but at least
definitely
meeting virtually. And I try to look for someone I think is going to be a go-getter and someone who won't be held back in incorporating new knowledge into their worldview.
Are there any other personality traits or skills that someone who is maybe still doubting whether a PhD would be the right thing for him or her?
Well, personality traits is an interesting thing that you mentioned, and I think it's not something to just disregard, because I'm going to be spending 5 years with you. And if your personality is such that it's not going to work, it's probably better that I realize that right off the bat and just say, I don't think it's going to be a good fit for us. I can't think of any time when I've ever done that, but I know that there have been people who have come to interview for others, to work with others, where I've had a hesitation, and I've communicated that to the potential mentor. Like, I think that there might be some issues here that we might want to not actually take on. So, yeah, it has to be someone who you think you can guide in a positive direction with the time that you have available.
And so you said that you don't expect specific knowledge in a specific field or previous experience maybe, but are there other skills that you expect, or that you say a person should be like this or should have these specific skills to be successful in PhD?
Yeah, someone who's a well-rounded thinker, I look for that. Someone whose essays that they've provided in their application are compelling and well written. That's something I look for. And again, just the letters of people who have worked with that individual. I look for that. I also make direct phone calls sometimes to people who I trust and say, do you have candidates graduating from your master's program who you might think would work well with us?
So networking is also an important thing maybe for both sides.
Yeah, I have one source, which I probably shouldn't name, but they don't they don't have a PhD program, but it's a fantastic place. So they're often very willing to, offer their folks up because they're not able to accommodate them for the doctorate.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really helpful for both sides as well, right? So if as a student, you know that your former supervisor is recommending someone like you, they know well, and you know the supervisor well. So yeah, then at least you have the first step where you can make sure that the broad expectations and skills might be there, and then it's just the next level that you need to look at.
Right.
Yeah.
And then also in assessing yourself, you need to assess your level of commitment to do this, because this is going to be 5 more years, probably. It's not a set time, but generally 5. As a student, you're going to continue as a student. You're not going to be earning the salary you would earn. It's going to cost you money to do this. It's going to take a lot of your time to do this. You're deferring the start of your career, really. So what is your willingness to sacrifice that time and money towards this goal? What is your level of passion for this?
And what would you say, or what do you advise mentees if they're not sure about this? What should they look for? Or do you know what I mean? Because I feel like sometimes for some students, they are sure that they are not going to do a PhD, and then there are some during their studies they develop, I think, the wish to do a PhD, and they're sure about it. But oftentimes, I suppose there are many that are just thinking about it and not being sure. Do you have any recommendation on how to assess the willingness or the certainty?
Well, I've always been of the mind that it is a lot of sacrifice. It's a lot of late nights.
It is, yeah. It's not a
Julia,
9 to 5
nodding.
job. Yeah, it's not like a 9 to 5 job, and the weekends are always off. Like, yeah.
So you have to want it.
Yeah.
And you have to want it. And if you don't, if you're unsure of whether you want it, then I would wait until you're sure. So work clinically, get that experience, make sure that you know that that's what you want to do.
That's another good point that you just said, working clinically. What is your experience with your PhD students? Are they working full-time on their PhD, or some working clinically part-time and then part-time doing their PhD?
They're working full-time toward their PhD. After they finish their coursework, some of them can devote a certain number of hours, I forget how many hours it is, towards their clinical certification requirement, their CF. So that has happened, and it usually prolongs their PhD program a little, but they're able to do them simultaneously. Some people arrive already having their clinical certification, so they don't. And I worked 4 years in between my master's and starting my PhD. And I worked in a research environment. I was a lab manager for a scientist in the communication sciences and disorders area. And that gave me great experience. I had publications already when I was starting my PhD, and I knew pretty much exactly what I wanted to do. So sometimes going straight through is not really the best thing to do. It's to gain that experience.
Yeah, and I really like the point that you said you really have to be sure about that you want it. And if not, something like working clinically or working as a research assistant, for example, might be helpful to figure out if you would like to do a PhD or not.
Yeah, I mean, for me, that was the thing. I worked in research. I realized how much we don't know in our field, and I wanted to contribute to that knowledge base, and I really wanted it by the time I went back after 4 years.
So my next question is, what can a mentee expect from his or her mentor? You've already started a bit on this topic.
Well, gosh. Um, a mentee can expect role modeling, can expect honest communication, can expect feedback, critique. So that mentor has to provide both positive and negative feedback. So that mentor has to be able and willing to do that. So that's definitely an expectation that you should have of your mentor. The mentor should be advising you on your scientific skills, on your training plan. So you'll develop a training plan with your mentor, and that's definitely something that mentor should be providing a lot of input on. Evaluating your progress, we've talked about that. Meeting with you on a consistent basis. The mentor should be available to you when you need advice, when you need letters of recommendation. Mm-hmm. That mentor should be providing that.
So compared to the student-professor or lecturer relationship during the undergraduate or postgraduate studies, what is the relationship like between a mentor and a mentee during a PhD?
Well, I think everything we've talked about, I've sort of been gearing toward the PhD. At the undergraduate stage, there could be a little taste of that. Like you might meet with the mentor a couple of times during the semester, and then really you'll be primarily working in the lab under someone else, a postdoc, for instance, if you're an undergraduate, or maybe the lab manager will direct you in your work. But really the PhD students and the postdocs are the ones who have most of the one-on-one time with the professor. At least that's how we do it.
Yeah, I think it's really important to know this, that this will change, because at the point where you're deciding on doing a PhD or thinking about it, you only have the experience in the past, and then to know that this will change is helpful, I think.
Yeah, it will definitely change, and different people do it different ways.
Yes, definitely.
I love being engaged with the undergraduates. I would do it if I could, but I just don't have time.
Yeah. And I think this is something else that we need to consider as students, right? That oftentimes it's not that our mentors aren't willing to or not interested in it. You just have to prioritize your time. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have one other question, because I think oftentimes for us as students, it feels like that we are taking your time as mentors, for example, and that you are advising us and you are giving us all your great knowledge and expertise and you're guiding us. But what can we students or mentees contribute to the mentor's work or lab?
Yeah, well, someone said, and I don't know who I'm quoting, but that the basic element of discovery, the smallest level of discovery, sort of like a phoneme, that basic element is the graduate student. So the graduate student is really the person who's doing that frontline research, and that is the one making the discoveries. I can plan the studies and provide the direction, but really the graduate student is the one who is going to be doing that work and contributing that science. I'll edit that, I'll evaluate that work, but the productivity in the lab is highly dependent upon the productivity of the student. So that's really what you're contributing to a large extent. So effective mentoring doesn't just benefit the student being mentored, but it benefits the mentor at all. Because both the mentee and the mentor have professional goals and they help each other achieve them. So it's important for the mentor and the mentee to realize that this is a relationship based on trust, based on goals that you each have and that you're each contributing very highly to each other's goals.
Yeah, and would you say that both the mentee and the mentor are equal parts of the team?
Yeah, with different functions.
Yes, yeah. So. But one can't succeed or progress without the other.
That's right.
I like that. I think it's really important for mentees to look at it from this perspective as well, right?
Right. You're bringing a lot to the table.
Great. Thank you so much. Is there anything that you would like to add? Any last advice for future mentees?
Yeah, I guess my last advice would be when you're choosing a mentor to be very proactive and to visit that mentor's lab, see what the vibe is there before making your choice, and to ask really good questions of that mentor. Do you think I'm a good fit for this lab? What are the chances that I would get funding next year? And to do this the year before, because you don't want to run out of time and realize that you've missed important application dates and things like that. And in terms of what questions to ask a potential mentor, you can Google that because they're all over the internet. What questions can I ask? There's even an NIH site. NIH is the National Institutes of Health here in the US. And it's a training website and it's called Questions for Potential Mentors. So I would look that up because there's fantastic questions on there. And do your homework. Read the papers from that lab. See if that work interests you. Ask for feedback after you meet with that mentor, as we've talked about. Evaluate your fit. And then once you're in that lab, really take charge of your learning and your experience. My most successful mentees have been the ones who have told me what they need and who have reminded me of an upcoming deadline for something that they need, who haven't just taken it for granted that I'm going to do what they need because I'm really busy, and they understand that. So they take charge of their own education. And those are the most successful people.
Thank you so much, Nadine, for sharing your experiences as a mentor and all your tips for future mentees. We hope this episode is helpful to some of our listeners who might be thinking about doing a PhD. As always, go ahead and follow us on Instagram at DysphagiaMatters, on Twitter at DysphagiaPcast, or visit our website dysphagiamatters.org. Thanks so much for listening. Thank you, Nadine, for coming on the show, and take care, everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nadine.
My pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.